Louisville. Please give a round of applause and welcome Father Judge Judie. Father John Judie.
Some things you just cannot escape. Amen. It is such a blessing to be here with all of you. And I always have looked forward to the opportunity when I could come up to Covington. Most of the time it's celebrating the Mass and the preaching, but it's just so wonderful to see everyone here today. I want to say very briefly that please excuse my remaining seated through the whole thing. I just had double knee surgery at the end of October following an accident. But lots of prayers, lots of healing and recovery. And I'll tell you, if you are not convinced about the power of prayer, let me tell you, the double knee surgery was October 25th. Exactly 2 months later, December 25th, I celebrated my first public Mass. So anyway, so I'll do this sitting down, but when we get to the discussion part, I would invite whoever may want to share something, if you don't mind standing, so we can at least see each other, okay? Okay. We know so much about Dr. King and his work and his ministry and the influence and impact he had on this country, raising people's level of awareness about racism, and particularly the injustice that has been rendered against people of color for years and years and years. And part of honoring him and his ministry and his life, we have to really take a look at the larger picture that he recognized and was clearly focused on in his life and his ministry. And that means we have to go back a lot farther than Dr. King. Okay? So we're going to do three things. Number one, I'm going to do a land acknowledgement. Okay? Almost all of us, if not all of us, did not originate on this land. Our ancestors came either by volition or by force. But that's how we got here. But we did not originate here. But there was a people that was originated, that God put here long before any of us and our ancestors came along. So I think it's important that we begin with acknowledging the gift of God's creation before we showed up. Okay? So we recognize this land on which we now live as an expression of our gratitude and appreciation to the Shawnee peoples who lived here and cared for this land thousands of years before us. We honor their long-standing history of developed communities and the richness of their culture celebrated in this very place we now call home. May we be as grateful to God for the care they gave to this land and maintained it long before us, honoring this land as the gift of God's creation to be preserved for present and future generations. Amen. Amen. The two things that I thought would be important for us to do today, the first part is I've done a lot of talks and interactions about anti-racism here, there, and everywhere, and I run into so many people who kind of understand a little bit of it, but honestly don't get it. Really, I mean, they don't, and I'm just being honest, it's not their fault. It's just that they've never been told the truth from the very beginning. So therefore, to recognize what is really racist in a society that we've all grown up in and we all have been affected by it, is not easy when you're inside trying to look out. So we've got to get outside and we've got to go back and find some truth. And what I'm saying is that this United States of America was born as a white racist society from the very beginning. So much of the truth of the history has never been taught It is not in our education system. It has been purposely left out of books, media, entertainment media, news media, historical presentation, and all of that, on purpose, to make sure that they could justify what happened on this land from the very beginning. So I'm entitling the first half of this talk, Racism, the Roots of It All. Okay, so racism has been labeled as America's original sin. Since there was an America before the Europeans came, it is more accurate to say that racism is the United States of America original sin. There is a difference. The indigenous people of this land had inhabited it for more than 12,000 years before the Europeans and other settlers showed up. Some of you know this already. History has taught for centuries that Christopher Columbus discovered America. It is more accurate to say Christopher Columbus discovered the Americans. Y'all get that? The Americans were here before he showed up. So he discovered the Americans. Who do you think welcomed him and taught him and his people how to till the land and survive the winters and all of that? This country was established in its 13 colonies, known as the United States of America. 13 colonies only on the east coast of the land, known as the United States of America. Would it be more accurate for this country in its beginning to be known as the United States in America? It's something to take a second look at. Columbus was looking for a shorter passageway to India. When he came to this land in 1492, he thought he had reached India. Thus he called the people of this land Indians. I work with so many people from the country of India in East Africa, and I'm constantly telling them, those are not your lost cousins. But all over the world, people have been told that the indigenous people of this land are red Indians. They're not red, they're brown like me, and they're not Indians, they're the true Americans, okay? What many people don't know is that 6 years later, Vasco da Gama, an explorer, was the one that actually reached India. Now, because of a weather situation, they landed on this land for a short while, but when they were able to sail again, they continued because he knew he had not reached India. And then he got to the real country of India and met the real people who are the Indians. And it's unfortunate, and to me a sad commentary, that even in today's world, our indigenous people refer to themselves as Indians, because it's what they've been taught and drilled into them all along. And I keep looking at them and I said, you're the Americans. You're the Americans, okay? In other lands around the world, Europeans came in and colonized. On this land, they came in and did genocide. 500 tribes of indigenous people massacred to take over the land and its resources. You know what that means? Everybody turn off your cell phones, including me.
I'm checking mine.
Yes. Let's go ahead and do it now. So many people have been taught that those who did this were pilgrims and immigrants. And although history records these events really as an invasion, our education system fails to identify them as invaders. But that's the truth. They were invaders, okay, by their actions, okay? Anyone who does research and reviews the written history of the indigenous tribes of this land will discover more of what really happened and what is true. There's enough recorded history by the indigenous people that tells you the real truth of what happened to them and what is still going on with them today. Even the true identity of the indigenous people of this land was taken from them. That's why all of us are walking around calling ourselves American. Now, personally, when I travel, I don't let them call me an American. I am a U.S. citizen. Okay, let's be clear. Don't confuse me. I'm not a product of the indigenous people of the land, so I'm really not truly American, but I am a U.S. citizen. I have visited some of the reservations in this country, and I've not seen anyone there who is red. Like I said, they're brown like me. I see most of them are that, and it saddens me that they and their history and their culture and their contribution to this continent has been completely smothered, buried in the ground, and almost nobody knows except them the true history and the culture that's there. In the news and entertainment media, as well as in literature, these tribes of indigenous people have been portrayed as savages. Y'all remember in the 1950s and 60s, the television shows, the Lone Ranger and all of that, and you know, these nice, peaceful, law-abiding pilgrims seeking a land for themselves and a home out west, and all of a sudden, they get attacked by these savages coming, and so you have to kill the savages to save the calm, quiet, peaceful white people. Well, I didn't say anything about the fact these calm, quiet, peaceful white people were coming to take over their land and their resources. And the indigenous people were fighting to keep what was their own. You don't get that in the entertainment media. But we have to know the truth and speak the truth from this point on. Amen? Amen. All right. Just think about, just to raise our own level of awareness about something. For example, the immigrants who came in the very beginning from Europe, some of you know about Ellis Island, off the coast of New York, where they were welcomed in, they were processed, Statue of Liberty, you know, bring your poor, your and all of this. Okay, they came in and they settled very nicely. Once they were large and in charge, then other immigrants coming in had to apply for what we know as a resident alien status, right? You know this term, resident alien status. Why would we call any human being on this planet an alien? You see how the lie continues? Alien means that you don't belong here. You came from some out of space, and so therefore we don't know enough about you, so we fear you, and we treat you that way. Resident alien status. Would anybody want to be labeled or have your loved ones labeled as an alien? This is United States of America. So we ourselves have to be aware and say, we don't use that term, and we don't let anybody else use that term with us. Okay? A few little known historical facts. Did you know that this invasion from the Europeans that came into the Americas and Africa was blessed by the Catholic Church in Rome? Some of you may know this doctrine of discovery. You can look this up. 15th century papal bulls issued by the Vatican and implemented by European monarchies, sanctioning the brutal and colonization of non-Christians who were deemed, quote unquote, enemies of Christ in Africa and the Americas. Okay. So the church blessed this mess. All right. I don't know how many of you know that Thanksgiving Day we celebrate this nice family gathering and nice meals and the pilgrims coming and all of this. At that day for the indigenous people is a day of mourning. I don't know how many of you may know that. Since 1970, they've gathered at Coles Hill in Plymouth, Massachusetts, to commemorate a National Day of Mourning on the same day of the U.S. Thanksgiving holiday. Many Native people do not celebrate the arrival of the Pilgrims and other European settlers. It's a reminder of the genocide of millions of Native people, the theft of Native lands, and the erasure of Native cultures. Participants in the National Day of Mourning honor their indigenous ancestors and Native resilience. It is a day of remembrance and spiritual connection, as well as a protest against the racism and oppression that indigenous people continue to experience worldwide. Bring it a little bit closer to home. I don't know how many of you know about the Indian Removal Act and the Trail of Tears. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed into law the forced removal of 60,000 indigenous peoples of at least 18 tribes. I'm talking this part of America where we are sitting today. Okay. There was forced to be moved west of the Mississippi River and relocate in the land that we know today as Oklahoma. Why? Because in what is now Georgia, there was discovery and greed of gold found in the lands. So they cleared out the indigenous people to take over the land and the resources. Among those 18 tribes that were forced to move were the Shawnees of this area and the Cherokees of southeast Kentucky, occupying the eastern half of our state. It is reported that 16,000 were moved by force, march, on foot, in which 25 to 50,000 died along the way. This is why that forced march is known as the Trail of Tears. Forced boarding schools. Native American boarding schools were established by the U.S. government in 1819 when the U.S. Congress passed the Civilization Fund Act. This led to the beginning of the Indian boarding schools era, 1879-1933. There was something like 530 of these. These were schools that were set up specifically to take the children from the families of the indigenous people and put them in these forced boarding schools, never to be returned, never to know anything else about their family, their history, their culture, their heritage, or anything. And about 1/3 of these schools were run by missionaries. So we have to own that as well, okay? The basic mindset, and this was thousands of indigenous children, the basic mindset was given by one headmaster of a school for 25 years, quote, "Kill the Indian in him and save the man." Now, it's worth investigating some of this. The stories are horror stories. I've done some travels to a number of the reservations of our indigenous people. I've sat with them. I've asked them to tell me their story, their history, their culture. And then I've attended museums in the Southwest. The more you read, the more horrific it is. But it's all truth. And once again, this is what has laid the whole foundation of the racism that Dr. King fought for and that we're still fighting for today. It's in the genes. Okay, it's in the genes. According to 2024 census of indigenous people right now living in Kentucky, we have 43,369. But there are no established reservations existing in the state. You heard some time ago in the media about the mass graves of children in Canada. You remember hearing about that?
Yes.
And the horror of that? I thought it was interesting that the United States sat back and let Canada take the rap for it. Because all of that land was part of America before they came in and made those boundaries. And that area where they found those graves, that was one portion of the Pacific Northwest. We have the whole other portion of the Pacific Northwest with our states out there, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, etc. All of that would have mass graves of children. All of it. The United States is not going to own it until somebody pulls their covers. Okay? But we need to know some truth. By the way, this is my final comment on the history. Today there is much concern about climate change, protecting the environment, and global warming. There is no record, evidence, or mention of these issues existing during the 12,000 years the indigenous people inherited this land. Imagine what it was, what it's become, and what it needs to go back to. Okay? All right, so that's just some background information. I'll stop there. If someone have any questions, comments, reactions, please feel free to be as open and honest as we can be, because if we're not going to deal with truth and honesty, then we would be wasting our time talking. Okay, so let's put it all out there on the table. Anyone, feel free to stand up. Anything you'd like to say?
I just have a comment.
Yes.
I don't know how many people know that there was a Choctaw school in Georgetown, Kentucky. And Choctaw went to that school specifically so they could learn how to outwit the whites.
Okay.
They, just as a fact.
Sort of a countermeasure.
They just wanted, they knew they had to learn. They weren't going to be taken.
Right.
Eventually they were.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Someone else? Any other comment, question, reaction? Yes?
I just want to say that when you made reference to alien, my father died in 1974, and up until then I would go and get a card for him to register him as an alien of this country, even though he came over when he was like 2.
Yeah, yes, yes. When you think about being labeled like that, it doesn't give you a good feeling that people really respect you for who you are.
Yep.
And one of the things I've said, because we deal with this all over the place, it's much easier to believe the lie, because if you learn the truth about someone, you have to respect them for who they are. As long as you believe the lie, you don't have to respect them. Treat them any way you want. Yes?
There is a new park, federal park near Xenia, which looks at the Shawnee Indians in the Ohio Valley. And it's a wonderful place. I don't think it goes far enough, but it certainly is a good step, looking at the culture of the Shawnee as they were here. It also has a whole area about the fact that they were moved on and why. It was done as a collaborative effort between the people of the state of Ohio and the Shawnee Indians who came in to work on the project. So it's free, and it's a friendly, family-friendly place. So if anybody wants to take a short day trip, it's a good place to start.
What's the name of it again?
Our sisters, if you look up parks in Ohio, federal parks in Ohio.
In Ohio.
It's right near Xenia, Ohio.
Xenia.
So it's about an hour away from here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just look under Shawnee
Shawnee
Museum.
Shawnee Museum.
Yeah,
Yes,
it'll be
okay.
there. Yeah.
Very good. It's really good to do your own investigation.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, sir.
So many tribes today are surviving economically because of casinos. How do you feel about that development and its impact on the tribe?
Well, I saw a lot of those, especially every reservation I visited, there is casino. That business really is a huge portion of the income that allows the whole reservation to thrive. They don't have a lot of options outside of the reservations to set up businesses, equal opportunities that people of the United States would have if you don't have the citizenship. I'm okay with it, because for me, it's their only, one of their main means of survival. You know, for me, it doesn't have anything to do with the morality of gambling or not. It's a means of survival. But I can also tell you, in Arizona, I visited one of several reservations where the state government sent out its militia and actually went in and destroyed the casino and destroyed all of the machines. They wanted to just take over it. So the other tribes in that area, they got themselves together and they told me that they were ready. So the next time the state government sent its militia out to a different tribe, all of the people gathered around and formed a human wall to prevent the militia from going in there. And along that same line, what I learned from listening to the people themselves in Arizona, there's always this, to this day, they say they're constantly fighting with the state government that wants to take over the little bit that they have. That just doesn't stop. Yes.
I just was given the information, the name of that park is the Great Council State Park.
The Great
Council
Council
State
State
Park.
Park. Great, thank you. The Great Council. Yes, sir.
Just a comment that in the plight that currently United States Census still does not keep track of any female Native American.
Okay.
And it was portrayed in a movie called Wind River in 2017 that shed light on the fact that there were a lot of disappearance in Alaska, some of the colder states, and every female, Native American female that was either murdered, killed, or somehow disappeared, no record was kept of. So United States Census still doesn't keep track of. They do the male Native Americans, but not the female.
Right, yes. And of course, you know, like I said before, when you're large and in charge, you set your own rules. And you operate by your own criteria, nobody else's. Okay, and it's mostly what's suitable to you. Doesn't necessarily take into consideration what is respectable or justifiable to anybody else. It's part of the reality that we continue to live in today. Yes?
When I was working on the Navajo Reservation some years ago, there was a mining company, the Peabody Mining Company, which did mining on the property, and the statement was that the native peoples own the top of the land, but the government, or the white folks, own what's under the land.
Right.
And so the Peabody Mining Company was getting all the benefit from these mines. The Navajo people did get some tax money from them, which helped them a little bit, but just the injustice of, you know, they didn't own what was under the land.
Right.
So, crazy.
Right. And I was told that when I was visiting one of the reservations in Arizona, they had the same problem with the state government about the portion of the river that runs through the reservation. State government says, well, the river is yours, but the land under the river is ours. So it's still going on, unfortunately. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Another comment on the casinos. You know, the way that they back them into a corner is the result that they have to create an economy that was so different from what they originally had. They didn't have a capitalist economy. They had a gift economy, and my wife brought a book home by a Native American. Her name was Robin Walls Kimmerer, and she talked about this. Yeah, it was called Serviceberry was the name of the book, but the Serviceberry is kind of a look at how the earth is a gift, and people that give create their own economy that just is much different than the taking economy that the Europeans brought to the country. And so, you know, the the casinos just become a way for them to be able to survive because had everything taken away.
Right, exactly, yes, thank you. Okay,
That's my husband.
yes,
I was just going to say that, Father, you brought up something very interesting about trying to deny the history and the injustices that have been done. I'm one that says you can trace the inequalities with wealth inequality, health inequality, all those things in the African American community to U.S. policy. You can directly correlate it. There's no doubt about it. You can read the history and see. And that if we don't confront that, I think that's the part, we're not confronting that, and that's why the continuation of us not learning the history, because we have to face the realities of some of the things that we've done
right,
in this country, especially to our African American population,
right,
you know, to our people. And then we talk about people at the border. I get so incensed when I hear people talking about people at the border, when those people are running from situations caused by the U.S. government, by intervention of the U.S. government. Everybody wants to deny that.
Yes.
They're coming, that it's stuff that we did, and nobody wants to own up to that. And until we're always going to be broken, we're always going to be, you know, all the ills that we see in our country are always going to be here because we've never addressed or legitimately addressed our original sin.
right. And, well, you know, and speaking of that, when one of these previous administrations in Washington came up with this thing about building a wall between the United States and Mexico, we never had a problem with Mexico. Mexico had a problem with us. Because we waged the war to take over part of Mexico to extend what is now Southwest United States of America. And I've always been curious, well, if you're so concerned about preventing immigration, especially illegal immigration, well, why would you talk about building a wall south of the United States? You don't talk about building one north of the United States. Well, all these white people are sitting up there. So you have to raise these questions. You can't just accept this for what it is. You have to look beyond that. How much truth is really being told? And this is going to bring us to the second half of the talk. And, you know, the theme also includes, you know, how we deal with racism today. Today for me means every next 24 hours is another today. So let's deal with this and how we personally need to deal with this today, okay? So I've been reflecting on the recent events in the politics of the United States and the politics of our U.S. Conference of Bishops. It occurs to me that we may need to dig more deeply into the essential elements of racism at work in our own lives and in our involvements with others. See, we can always kind of talk about it, something out there, but we need to bring it home. We need to deal with it at home, but we have to recognize it first and then know how we are prepared to respond to it once we encounter it in our everyday interactions with others. Perhaps we could use more clarity on what sustains and perpetuates racial attitudes, behaviors, and practices we encounter so that we can self-evaluate and respond more courageously in any and all circumstances in which we find ourselves. So with this on my mind, allow me to suggest that we consider what we know as structural and systemic racism versus interpersonal racism. Okay? Structural and systemic racism. It's the complex interaction of large scales of societal systems, practices, ideologies, and programs that produce and perpetuate inequalities for racial minorities. We know the list: housing discrimination, government, law enforcement, surveillance, social segregation, racial profiling, predatory banking. We know all of that. That's the structural and systemic racism, okay? Let's talk about interpersonal racism. The beliefs, attitudes, and actions of individuals that support or perpetuate racism in regards to people different from themselves. This can occur both on a conscious and a subconscious level. It can also be both active and passive. It is based on racist assumptions, beliefs, or behaviors, often rooted in personal prejudices. Its form can be intentional or unintentional. For example, telling racist jokes, believing in the inherent superiority of white people. And these are things that we should easily recognize. All right. Scenario, and I'm gonna use my own personal experiences on this. Archdiocese of Louisville is 216 years old. I'm only the second of 4 African-American priests ordained for the Archdiocese, 216 years. Because I was number 2, we had a 30-minute television program, like a news reporting thing called Closer Look, that aired twice a week. At my deacon ordination, they decided that it was significant or historical enough that they would do some coverage. I didn't send for them. They invited themselves. Okay? So they came out, they did this coverage. Second African American ordained a deacon for the Archdiocese to be ordained a priest later. When I watched the airing of the program on Closer Look, in 2 minutes, they reported 6 biographical errors on me. Nobody talked to me. Nobody asked me anything. Nobody verified anything with me. Somebody decided it wasn't important to get the truth from me. So they went ahead and aired 6 biographical errors on me. My first question, who's in charge? So I went to the priest in charge, and I told him about it. He never stopped smiling through the whole thing. I remember that clearly. I said, I said, I'm appalled that all of this stuff got aired. He gave one excuse after another. Well, there was probably hired people because it was on the weekend, and I said, regardless of that, they got paid for what they did. Yeah. I said, secondly, nobody verified anything with me. I said, this is irresponsible journalism. He offered excuses. He never apologized for it. He never agreed that it was irresponsible journalism. And he never offered to do a follow-up story with the truth since 1986. Okay, so those lies are still out there. Okay? That's the interpersonal racism. You gotta look through what's going on and ask the right questions, but then you gotta address it with the right person. And say, no, you have to know, at least from me, this is not acceptable. And I am not going to say it's okay. It's not. And I'm not gonna be silent about it either. Okay? So in all of our interactions with others, we must be careful to recognize and avoid in any way making people feel different from us. The mantra that I always use with my talks about my own personal experience, made to feel welcome, but not made to feel wanted. Okay? And you can interact with some of your own associates, people you know, maybe they're part of the immigrant culture here, maybe they're part of the oppressed culture or whatever, and you will hear their own experience. Oh yeah, you're welcome. United States of America, welcome, welcome. But you're not wanted. And we have systemic and structural racism to let you know you're not wanted. Okay. Second scenario, when I was in seminary in Baltimore, that seminary has been there 233 years. was there in the 1980s. I was only the 13th black priest I know of that came out of there in the 1980s, only number 13. It was only recently, 2019, that they admitted the fact that the success of that seminary and its construction, etc., depended significantly on the labor of enslaved men, women, and children. Our black ancestors built that seminary, and all of these mother houses, and all of these cathedrals. Even though for so many years, especially during segregation, our black people never welcomed in them. Or if they were welcome, they had to sit in the back of the pews. Okay? I know in the original cathedral in Kentucky, in Bardstown, when they did have allowed the blacks, the reason they brought the blacks in was not to evangelize them, it was for the whites to keep an eye on them while they were at worship. Okay? We have to make sure we keep an eye on them. They're not up to something. So then when some of them started wanting to be baptized and welcomed into the church, there was a big debate. This was, I think, the 1860s, about, and some of you know this, about baptizing us because they were not sure if we had souls. And there were conditional baptisms made. If you have a soul, I baptize you. This is real stuff. Okay. But you see how it's so embedded in people's thinking, but you have to recognize and say, no, something's wrong with this picture. And so we need to speak to it and call it for what it is. Okay. Being a black student in that seminary was not a picnic ride. But then again, I was not there for a picnic. So I gave them as much challenge as they gave me. And I didn't, I mean, you see, this is me personally, and I said this to the rector just before I left at the end of 4 years. I said, this seminary for me is a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. I got someplace else to go, something else to do. I said, for you, this is the end. You ain't going nowhere else but right here. Okay? And I can tell you, in 37 years, I've never set foot in the place again and have no intention to. None whatsoever. Interpersonal racism. We have to raise questions about people that want to make decisions about us and for us. And we have to question when we witness them doing it for somebody else. And say, well, wait a minute. Is it fair that we can decide for somebody else how they can do or what they should do? Because if we remain silent, then we'll be complicit. That's, oh yeah, well, you must agree with it if you don't object to it. And sometimes they will put it out there just to see where you stand, okay? But we have to be courageous enough and diligent enough to say, no, wait a minute, let's look at this a different way. Let's question this. Is this truly the right way to do it? Or, you know, in some cases, I would say, is there some racial element in this that you don't see? I see it. Okay. I would just give one more scenario and then we'll have time to process. Let's bring it up to 2024. Okay. March the 1st, 2024, in Archdiocese of Louisville, we had a symposium on racism. You know, our Archbishop is the one that gets all the credit for this last pastoral letter from the bishops on racism, opened wide our hearts. Well, I read the pastoral letter once and I closed it and I said, nobody's heart is opened here. You know why? It was nice what they put on paper, but there was nothing on paper that held anybody accountable to do anything. Nice teachings. but no accountability, no commitment to take any definitive action and be held accountable for it. All right. So anyway, I was asked to do this, be part of this presentation, Symposium on Racism. There were two other speakers, out of towners, and I said, put me on last because I want to bring it home. So the first speaker talked about the historical perspective. I gave you some of that. The second speaker, who was a white American, but very sensitive, culturally and racially sensitive, who refers to us, the people of color, as his siblings of color. Okay? And he really is very open and honest and struggling with dealing with racism as a white American in this society and in this church. Then I got up and I said, everything I'm going to say is based on my own experience as a black priest in this archdiocese for 36 years. I said, I'm sorry some of the people that I will refer to are no longer here to speak for themselves, but I am here to tell my side of the story. And I did, and I went through a whole scenario of things. The next week when the diocesan newspaper came out, of course it was front page, and it acknowledged the three of us as speakers. And then as you read the article, there was some content given on the first speaker and the second speaker. There was absolutely nothing of the content I said included in the diocesan newspaper. Nothing, not one word. Okay, my first question, who's in charge? So I confronted the editor of the diocesan newspaper. I got excuses. Well, the reporter, she probably had to leave at lunchtime because we had a deadline and and excuse me. You never had to worry about deadlines when you have holidays and holy days and, you know, you talk about tax times and salaries and all of that, you know. And, you know, just one excuse after another. And then she tried to clean it up by saying, I've always admired your ministry in Africa. I wrote back and I said, when the ministry celebrated its 25th anniversary of the ministry in Africa, which is supported by so many people of this archdiocese, I asked for some coverage and I got nothing. No response. So I said, in the future, take me off your mailing list. There's no point in my reading anything that you produce because I do not know how much truth is put in and how much truth is left out. So just take me off your mailing list. So I was away to Africa for some months. I came back and there were all of these editions of this newspaper. I took all of them, I wrapped them up, I took them down to the editor and I put them on her desk. All of them. Take me off your mailing list. Okay. So ask me what's going on in Archdiocese, I had no idea. I'm totally disconnected and happily disconnected. I'm just being honest about it. Okay? So, this is how I survived being a black priest in this white racist society, this white racist church. Questions, comments? Yes?
Did you want us to stand?
Please, if you don't mind, so everybody can see.
Okay. There's a little difficulty with that. I'm Gail Miller, and I'm in a group that is around Greater Cincinnati for various reasons, two groups. So I'm here because several people have mentioned being here. But what Father Judie is saying made me think of what's really happening now. And I'm struggling with the facts. I have to get the facts. Small news item in Cincinnati that a church that I hadn't heard of, I think it's called something like Mother of Christ, small, somebody saying yes. Okay. And it sounded this was just one little segment, I didn't hear it on any other, more than one network. But apparently the Archdiocese is closing it, and all the scene, the couple little snaps of it, and it seemed to me like it was a fairly large African-American, what's the correct name? African-American
That's fine.
population, and I thought, okay, is it closing like they're closing some of them? If any of you know that these groupings of churches, a beacon of light thing is happening, and there are places being closed, the usual, if they give an excuse, it's for economic reasons, they can't keep things up, and the Archdiocese, and it's small. I think this place was small, but they didn't say why they were closing it. And it looked to me like it was another one being closed. Now, we have some people in the parish in St. Francis de Sales who have moved, large groups of them have moved from St. Anthony Parish, which was a very vibrant, is, I guess, still a very vibrant parish, but had a strong African-American population and a mixed population, whites, blacks, I don't know how many other populations, I wasn't there. But they still exist, and there's another small white church over on the river, St. Stephen's. I think it's a white church, mostly. If that's the economic reason, I want to know, and I don't, when you say, find out who's responsible, well, that's where my struggle is. Oftentimes when I've had issues with any social issues, I go to letters to the editor. Okay. At one time, the Archdiocesan newspaper in Cincinnati was Catholic Telegraph. It's still called Catholic Telegraph. They had letters to the editor. They don't even have that anymore. You can't express an opinion, which I've written about, I think. But who do you then write to? And I'll get into journalism with the Cincinnati Herald too, which is a really good newspaper, but their management had me, that's a whole other thing. They've got good news, but I couldn't get them to even let me subscribe. That's a whole other side. So I'm trying to get information there. So what I'm getting to, the main thing is, it's work to find who is responsible. And that's, if anybody knows who's been at St. Anthony, how they found who was responsible for making the changes with